Hello and welcome to Founders Amplified, where we spotlight underrepresented founders who are driving innovation and impact across various industries and sectors across the globe. I'm your host, Narayan Kulkarni, and I'm excited to be here with you today. Today's guest is Lindsay Davis. Lindsay Davis is the founder of Femtech Association Asia. Originally from the USA and UK and now based in Singapore, Lindsay identifies as a gender health equity advocate and femtech industry ecosystem builder in Asia. She attended the University of Texas Austin, graduating with a degree in liberal arts. Her industry association, Femtech Association Asia, drives the advancement of the femtech industry across the region with the ultimate vision of available, accessible, and affordable healthcare for all women in Asia. She was most recently recognized in 2025 and 2024 as the winner of the Great Companies Women's Entrepreneurship Award, 2024 Community Business Awards finalist, and received a certificate of commendation from Speak in Asia, 2023 Most Inspirational Femtech CEO in APAC Insider Awards, and honored on 2023 Singapore 100 Women in Tech list. So, now that you know a little bit more about Lindsay, let's dive in to the conversation. Welcome to Founders Amplified, Lindsay. It is so great to have you with us today. How are you doing?
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It's nice to join you. I think what is my coffee hour here in the morning in Singapore, over in Asia, and for you, perhaps, dinner time. So it's nice to be connected on different sides of the world.
Yeah. Again, thanks so much for being here. And as you talked about, one of the beautiful parts of this podcast is we have a global audience. And so we'll have it's nighttime for me in the US, you're joining from Singapore. So we have really special conversations like this. And so let's get started. The first question I'd like to ask you and know a little bit more about is what led you to become a founder? And was there any particular moment or experiences that sparked that decision to become a founder specifically for Femtech Association Asia?
Thank you so much for that. I moved to Singapore in January of 2020. So obviously just a couple months before we had, kind of the real lockdown, pandemic, COVID, et cetera. So I left my job of about 10 years in the luxury space back in London and had run a global division of a company, specifically our global franchise network. So I traveled a lot. I always thought I, understood Asia, had done a lot of work in Asia, had set up offices in China, had done a lot of work in Thailand, and had a lot of clients here. But I think I didn't really understand how little I knew. So when I moved to Asia my first year, my whole goal was to meet as many people as possible, have as many conversations about as many different topics as possible. This was my chance at kind of a career change. So leaving the luxury space, I thought I definitely want to be involved in tech, but what can that look like? So as I started chatting with people, I overheard someone use the word femtech. And of course, like most people, I thought, oh, women in tech, I love that, would love to get involved. And they said, actually, it's female technology. So women's health and technology. And I was like, oh, that's fantastic. So I got online, started researching, and didn't see anything. Started Googling, didn't see anything, started chatting with people, didn't hear a lot in the market, but came across a few people who immediately wrote me back on email, who immediately called me back when I called them, who immediately were up for a coffee. And I thought, with this level of responsiveness, there's clearly a gap in the market. And so I launched Femtech Association Asia, looking specifically at how we could grow the femtech industry in Asia. What I thought might start as Singapore quickly turned into 10 countries. We most recently launched in November of 2024 in Bhutan. That was our 10th country. So we're expanding quickly. And I think it really shows the engagement in this region, as well as the drive and the acceleration of women's health in Asia.
Wow, that's amazing. Thanks so much for sharing. One thing that really stood out to me as you shared was, so first of all, it sounds like you worked in luxury in the UK, and then you moved to another country, and then just through conversations, through just like being a student of wanting to learn, then really seeing a gap, and then which it sounds like, I know you've talked about this in some of your previous interviews, you have a really deep passion for women's health, gender equality, etc., and then finding that as a way to then meet bridge your personal passion with a gap. So I really appreciate that perspective. Now that leads me to my second question, however. So of course you're a white woman who's living in Asia. You have a luxury career, and then now like you're working with a lot of startups. And also you're an immigrant to a country with a very vast amount of diversity, but also of course you're a woman who like works in women's health, where like you it sounds like you have a lot of different perspectives, and I'm sure there are many other identities that you bring to your work. So how do the confluence of those identities give you a unique angle in what you do at Femtech Association Asia?
That's a really big question. And I think, having grown up originally in the US, lived in a few places in Europe, moved to Asia, again, having done business around the world, I think the first thing that comes to mind is I have a really, what you said, I loved what you said earlier, Narayan, where you said looking at being a student and actually learning. And actually, how do we absorb rather than just speak and try to action right away? So anyone who knows me knows I'm very energetic, I'm very action oriented, and I really love kind of making an impact through kind of driving forward. What I have learned in moving around the world and being in different cultures and having different sets of challenges, presented, and especially a whole change in career, something I was known for previously, and now building a whole new career and a whole new voice and a whole new, we could even say personal brand, which I don't always love, but a whole new kind of, expertise or SME label, and moving into the femtech space. So I think a lot of it has come from, to your point, one, listening and actually knowing that I know very little compared to everyone around me. And it's only through the research I've done, the conversations I've had, the books I've read, the media platforms like Founders Amplified that I've listened to, that's really allowed me to learn more. Secondly, I really am a very curious person. So I've actually had people tease me before because they say I tend to interview other people, even in conversation. How did you get there? Tell me more about that. So it's in my nature to almost turn into the interviewer, because I learn actually from speaking with other people. And I've identified that that is how I learn best, is in conversation. So for me, whilst did well in school, I do much better in the real world. And I think that is why the move from luxury to entrepreneurship has been so fascinating for me, because entrepreneurship is all learning. So many of these businesses are looking at new problems or pain points that haven't been addressed before, or looking at femtech, which is, whilst a nascent industry, certainly isn't niche. We're talking about half the world's population, but it just is so untouched. There's so much white space. So it's really like trying to just kind of find new paths and journeys to solutions. So it's constant learning, constant curiosity, and a whole lot of listening, which for me, being an interviewer, can actually be a real pleasure.
Well said. I really want to emphasize the point about listening and learning in the context of being an ecosystem builder, because I've worked with, supported, and connected with various different ecosystem builders. And when people think about that role, they think it's about like coordinating, being like a shadow figure that goes out and like brokers a bunch of different stuff, and like it's basically like king making, if you want to use that term. But actually, and I think you're an amazing example of this, where it's about like being a student, bringing your own passion, developing relationships, but also driving meaningful action to things that matter for people for whom it matters. And I just love that you've talked about that in your story, but also in how that maps into Femtech Asia. And that's actually a perfect segue to my next question. So, as you and I both know, Femtech is a very important, very rapidly growing, very needed space with many different ecosystems around the world. Now, Femtech Association Asia is, of course, its unique ecosystem, not only in terms of where it's geographically located, but what it does. So could you tell us a little bit more, first of all, about what Femtech Association Asia is, and the unique ways in which it does ecosystem building that might be different or unique among other Femtech ecosystems in Asia, but also more broadly globally?
It's a great question, and thank you for the opportunity to share more about us. So, Femtech Association Asia, I launched in October of 2021 with a vision for available, accessible, and affordable healthcare for all women in Asia. So ultimately, our solutions, whether they be products or services for women's health, menstrual trackers, hormonal health wearables, menopause solutions in communities, whatever category of women's health that might look into, our role is to really support the founders from the ground up to build the commercial industry. I think a lot of times when we talk about women's health and impact, we see people referring to, again, as I just said, impact or giving or charity. It immediately goes into. And for me, I understand that. But for me, our goal as Femtech Association Asia is to create an ecosystem that is supporting commercial success for women's health. We believe if we can build sustainable businesses that are addressing women's health, that we will see change in the market as far as this available, accessible, and affordable healthcare. And obviously, technology is a huge part of that. So what we do now is we have kind of 5 key pillars, since we are the first and largest specialist advisory and women's health or femtech industry across the 10 countries in Asia, and obviously always looking to expand into new countries in Asia, which is really exciting. But our pillars really are one, thought leadership. So looking at research. How do we actually start looking at this under-researched category and adding to that? So we're always looking for research partners. Number 2 is programming. So we had the first homegrown women's health conference in Asia in June of 2024, Femtech Connect Asia. We look at a lot of virtual. We have one coming up at the end of this month, a virtual event around demystifying AI for femtech companies. So actually, how do we use AI beyond, the chat GPT or the more traditional, I shouldn't even say traditional, it's such, people are just using it now, but the more common uses for it. And what do we need to be aware of when we're thinking about regulation, bias, inclusivity in the AI space? So we do thought leadership, programming. My favorite word, because it's what we're talking about today, amplifying. So we do a lot of work with the media and the press. We do a lot of work, sharing information and actually trying to really lift up the industry, the founders, the investors, and really promote the great work that's being done in this space. And then finally, like you said, community building. So whether it's founders, whether it's government agencies, whether it's corporate partners, which we've seen a huge trend in more supporting us, we're really trying to include all people in the women's health and femtech space, because we believe that, again, building from the ground up is how we're really going to make change. And that's going to be through entrepreneurship as a key contributor to the shift in women's care.
Well said. Thanks so much for sharing. It's cool to see that those 4 pillars that you've talked about are so central to what you're doing. I have, of course, connected with many different ecosystem builders in different parts of the world. And it's like, of course, the skill set of the ecosystem builder, but also the needs of what are there in that unique environment kind of form a really cool confluence. So from you, one thing I'm receiving is, based on your experience, it's cool that like you have like the community building aspect, because like with your luxury perspective, also your background, you have that unique ability to make that bridge, but also with, for example, like your expertise in expanding to different countries and working with different places, like the thought leadership part as well, it sounds like it's something that is really unique that you and your partners are able to give. And I think this is also especially exciting, and to talk something you mentioned earlier, like I know, for example, and for our audience, you can look at other pieces that Lindsay's done, like Femtech Association Asia, they have a lot of work in many different parts of Asia, whether, like, of course, it's Hong Kong, Southeast Asia, Bhutan as well. So there are lots of different places that they look. And it's so really cool to see that, like, you're able to do and connect people in all those different ways. And that actually leads to my next question, which is more about the thought leadership part. So I know that, like, you've done lots of really cool research. I've come across a few reports of yours in overview and in like a little bit more insights. And there's one that I know we corresponded about recently. You wrote what you mentioned more recently, which is your Amelia report on like Southeast Asia and Femtech in 2024. So I know there's so many different things that you found out about the industry in that report, but what are 1 or 2 insights that you gleaned that might really stand out from what you did there?
Thank you for that. I mean, again, great question. I love that we're getting to talk about this research, in these amazing forums like Founders Amplified. I think the first thing that came to mind was I was certainly not surprised because I think, stigma and taboo is in every culture around the world, whether we see it through social media, blocking certain women's health solutions, even when using proper anatomical words or whatever that may be, certain visuals, even if, again, it's just the human body. So, why are we blocking these things that prevent education? But what we actually found is in Southeast Asia, when we looked at the top femtech companies for Southeast Asia as far as presence of femtech businesses, we found that in these 6 countries, if you put them all together, an average of 52% of women hesitated to speak openly about women's health. And the main reason for that,
52, 5-2. Wow.
52%.
Wow.
And the reason was a fear of judgment or shame. So the fact that even today we still feel shameful about talking about our bodies as women, that's a concern, because if we're not talking openly about our personal issues or things that we might think might be a problem, or even really understanding the average health experience for a woman, we won't know. And for instance, we see things like PCOS taking up to 7 years, 5, 7 years to be diagnosed. And of course, there are women who are going through this process, who have the challenges of PCOS, of the pain, excessive bleeding, et cetera. And they may just think, oh, it's a problem. They talk to their doctors, and sure, of course, it might be that their doctors dismiss them. But if they never even know that there is something PCOS, how would they know to even ask about it or explore it? And so much of women's health is really about us being empowered to not only ask questions openly, but feel like there's going to be an answer for those questions. And so, I believe that seeing that 52% of women didn't feel it was acceptable to openly talk about health was concerning. And then followed up on that, we do know that, one of the barriers to using femtech solutions, which can be a great access point for women, is really a lack of understanding. So the fact that only, 1 in 4 women in Southeast Asia have heard of femtech, which of course is an industry term, is very different. But when we even look and dive deeper, we see that it's pretty typical of the world, and that most women are familiar with menstrual care, but there's so much more to women's health, as we talked about earlier, from fertility solutions, menopause, perimenopause solutions, pregnancy devices. There's so much more out there. So a lot of it for women is just a lack of understanding about their own health or the solutions that are available. So I found that to be really, really interesting, is just some of these blockers are really around awareness, education, and cultural acceptability around discussing women's health. But again, I don't think that's just Asia. I do think we see that in many markets worldwide.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. That really resonates with what you shared with me, because so as the audience knows, I'm born in India, but I live most of my life in the US. I mean, I'm a man, but I have like a mom who was an OB-GYN. I have a lot of my friends who've worked in this industry. I've done early in my career in health administration, lots of projects focused on OB-GYN access and access to reproductive care, specifically from a hospital and institutional standpoint. So I have seen from a research perspective the angle of, hey, we need access and staffing, but also as someone who has been a new femtech investor and has interviewed a number of different women's health individuals, and I have a number of friends who are in different parts of the world in women's health. They've talked about, to your point, like cultural barriers can affect how one engages. Also, many women, just because of that, there's a lack of education. I will say, like, I mean, as a Hindu, for example, and also this also extends to men. So, for example, as a Hindu, like, there are certain religious days where, like, I would of course be able to participate, but like I saw that like female family members or female friends of mine did not, and I was like, what is that the case? And so I learned there's I was euphemistically told it's lady stuff, but then I realized like there's, for example, the aspect of there's the health aspect of menstruation, but also that has been unfortunately turned into cultural taboos, which in some parts of the world have been damaging and threatening, but also that has unfortunately turned into, to your point, judgment or shame, even though those have been stories that have been way back when, to this point. So it is like, I really appreciate you talking about the point of barriers in terms of education, but also in terms of culture. And those are really deep things. But also I want to emphasize this because I strongly believe women's health, of course, there's technological innovation, but there's also justice, but also there's profound cultural change. There's so many systems that shift when women's health solutions are moved forward, which is why I think it's so important that women are leading it, but also there are appropriate allies that are plugged in appropriate ways and at minimum educated in the way that's there. So I think when we move forward innovation, and particularly in a large place like Asia, where there are like a lot of these culturally like embedded taboos or like discourses that can be challenged, but when it's done well and thoughtfully within knowing that cultural context, it can be really powerful in so many different ways. And that actually leads me to my next question. So I'm sure you've engaged with, like, I know, like, last time I remember, you have worked with 80 different startups in your portfolio across the 10 different countries. I'm sure you've seen many different innovations in sector, but also in terms of particular things that people are doing. Can you tell us a little bit more about what are some exciting innovations, say in like verticals or maybe specific startups or particular examples that are exciting to you? I'm sure there are many, but maybe one or two if you could share for our audience.
I could talk about this for hours, so I'll have to keep myself limited. But I also wanted to say before we move on, thank you for, being an advocate and a voice for women's health, as well as an investor in women's health. I think these are all things we need to actually have the conversations, have the funding, have the support of an inclusive and diverse community. Because at the end of the day, as I always say, women's health isn't just women's health; it's societal health and economic health, actually, because
And
we do know a
planetary
phrase
health as
and
well.
planetary health, right? So all of these things really are combined. So I just wanted to really say that and acknowledge what you just said, first of all. When you're asking, what are some of the things I'm really excited about? I actually just did a piece of research with Ultraviolet Agency in the UK. So again, starting to work with different partners around the world to really lift up the profile of Asia, because I see a lot of events around the world that are with women's health, but they don't include our region. So I'm really trying to push, our founders, our startups, our industry on this side of the world into different regions around the world, make sure that we're really part of that global discussion. So some of the trends I've seen so far is, first of all, we're seeing over here a lot of menopause communities launching. That's really exciting, because going back to your point about school, and that's where the majority here in Southeast Asia learn about women's health, is in their early school days. When we asked in our research what women were talking about at school, or what they were being taught about, not talked about, excuse me, taught about at school, it's menstrual health, puberty, and STIs. Well, a woman's lifespan is so much more than that when it comes to health. So when we see the fact that menopause communities are popping up, it's showing that as women are aging, they're demanding more. And they're saying, I need more help than what I'm seeing on what I'm going through, and I'm looking for the solution. So consumer demand matters. Secondly, we're seeing a lot more investment by the startups into mobile apps. So whether it's companies like Avi Health in Indonesia, which is a fertility company and also starting to move into the longevity and women's health space, they're actually looking at how can our app better track. And so they've updated their entire app. It looks amazing. And also Pistol in Malaysia, a company, again, that's looking at holistic women's health in Malaysia. And they've just actually launched their app for the first time. So more investment in apps. We're seeing more corporate program rollouts. And here in Singapore, I'd love to call out HSBC, the Commercial and Investment Bank, who supported us with the Femtech Forum. And actually, we partnered with them as Femtech Association Asia and HSBC to kind of launch a big ecosystem platform live in person at the golf championships this year, the women's golf championships this year, which was super exciting. And we're seeing more and more corporate engagement. We're seeing moving beyond fertility. So companies that have typically been fertility based are now looking at more holistic health, knowing that fertility isn't just that small window, it's the whole hormonal kind of experience and journey. And also starting to look at men's health under femtech, because a lot of fertility issues can actually be originated with the man's health. So it's really making sure that we're, balancing evenly what healthcare means. And my final point is really just around looking at increasing investor confidence. We are seeing more investment coming into the space, whether it's Zora Health, the fertility company, raising, whether it's Kindred in the Philippines raising, or Mother Care Plus in Malaysia raising. These are really unprecedented numbers, and it's very exciting. We haven't had our unicorn, we haven't had our big exit yet, but I think the fact that the momentum is there and we're seeing that funding traction and the engagement and curiosity from investors means we're on the right path with what we're doing with Femtech Association Asia to bring more people into the ecosystem and really raise the profile through our work.
Wow. Again, I really appreciate the examples of particular startups that you shared, from Kindred to Avi Health and many more, that they're from many different countries. And one thing, one word I absolutely love that you mentioned is holistic, because I mean, you and I both know this. A lot of people who are in the femtech space know this. Like fertility, of course, is such a dominant vertical aspect of femtech, and yeah, for right reasons. But there's so much more. Like things like oncology, for example, gets a lot of funding, but also there are areas like pelvic health, for example, vaginal health, for example. Like the list goes on. There's so much more to like women's health and just like that important, but like window. And I also appreciate you mentioned menopause as well, because that's such a crucial aspect of care that like is well known to have like challenges in terms of workplace, but also just like also with a woman going through menopause, how that affects her family as well, and like the support and etc. So I appreciate like the specific insights you provided on not just amazing startups, but also aspects of women health. Now I'd like to maybe go deeper into more recent trends. So we're recording this episode in like August 2025. I'm sure you've seen like a lot of really exciting action in the first 6 months of 2025 in Asia. What are some trends that you've seen, and maybe extrapolating out, what could be some of the ripple effects or impacts that could create in Asia?
It's a really great question. So, the first thing I would say that I've seen are more women's health clinics launching in Singapore. So, specifically for women and in women's health. And now, of course, this isn't all of Asia yet, but I think it's exciting to see this trend starting. And a lot of these are really built around, as you just said, holistic health. And a lot of this is looking at the longevity trend that we've seen, which when we think about longevity, we often think about men and men's health. I think that's just a natural place we go, but we are starting to see that women's health and longevity is really a trend that's coming to the forefront. The second thing I would say, when we look at trends in the marketplace, is more kind of cross border work or companies moving from one market into another. Examples again, Zora and Avi Health. We have Avi Health moving into Singapore. We have Zora Health moving in turn to Indonesia. We're seeing companies in Hong Kong and China starting to work more together. So we're seeing definitely a trend in companies expanding or collaborating across, across border, which is really interesting and very exciting. Also really interesting when we talk about regulation. So definitely something that we've seen in policies. Definitely 100% something I've seen maybe as a closing point, as a third point for this question, is looking at, we are seeing more governments discussing women's health, including it in their plans and their programs, being more open about the discussion, whether it's the HPV vaccine, an easily preventable, cancer if we get those shots early enough. Things like moving beyond family health and reproductive health and maternal health, which is typically what we've seen, and starting to say, actually, a lot of our senior women leaders, to your point, are aging and they're in the menopause space. So, as much as it is about health, of course, we want them to be healthy women. But part of that is because it continues to be productive for the workforce and bring money into the country. And so, really, I think when we balance the commercial side of femtech with the health side of women as individuals, we have a really powerful story for explaining why, again, societal health and economic growth really do go hand in hand. So those are maybe some of the things I've seen recently that I'm pretty excited about. And I continue to work in femtech. Every time I think, I don't know if I can do this another day, it's so hard. It's so hard. And there are so many obstacles and so many challenges. But every time I see trends and small wins like this, I get really excited and it keeps me motivated for the next day.
Wow, well said. I really appreciate the points. I mean, for example, about longevity, thinking about the impacts that has on like economy, but also like health, etc. Cross border, thinking about the impacts that has on connectivity, sharing of knowledge, sharing of culture, and like connectivity. But also government and policy, thinking about the impacts that has just on like how people, not only of course how women are helped, but also how all of society is helped through the benefits of good governance and the revolving door effect that creates it, more women being more informed and empowered, and then how that shifts ways in which governance occurs in society. So I really appreciate those three trends that you've talked about. Well said. So I know, like as you've alluded to, and I would also like this has been an amazing discussion. We could probably have this discussion for hours, but sadly,
I
as our
know.
episode's winding down, I have a few closing questions that I'd like to get to. The first question is, so I'm sure you've obviously, like, in your time with Femtech Association Asia, learned so much, and this is a two-part question. What is one thing you know about ecosystem building that you know now you wish you had known before? What's one thing you know about Femtech in Asia that you know now that you wish you had known prior?
Wow, two big questions. I had to write them down so I wouldn't forget both. So forgive me for looking down as we're chatting here.
Totally fine.
Ecosystem building. So the first thing I have learned, and I think probably a lot of people learn this, I say yes to everything. So one of my favorite articles I've ever read and books I've ever read is back in 2013. Can you believe it? Adam Grant, the Wharton professor, wrote Give and Take, and he talks about kind of strategic giving. So I really try to say yes to everything. But what I used to do is say yes to everything in every form of what anyone wanted. Now I'm a bit more strategic in what yes is. So, for instance, it's making sure that I'm saying yes to things that are actually going to drive the industry forward and not just be present or say, oh, we're talking about women's health, but it's actually in a panel that's off to the side in an area that no one actually goes at the conference. It's making sure we're front and center when we're talking about things. So I'd say the biggest thing I've learned about ecosystem building is when to use the word no productively and how to be strategic with our yeses. So that would be the first thing I'd say on ecosystem building, because time is very limited and we want to make sure we help as many people as possible and have maximum impact for those different startups and those different founders or those different clinicians or whomever needs support from us. When it comes to femtech, I cannot tell you how much I have learned, but I think what blew my mind, if we want to talk about resources, is reading the book Invisible Women about data bias. Talk about, I had no idea the gender health gap was this huge. And when you start compounding that with all different other aspects of life, and the data points from medical care to prescriptions and medication to even urban design, how it impacts women and men differently, that opened my eyes. So of course I'm going to be a little selfish with your question here and say beyond femtech, I'm looking at the woman's experience, but it really, gender health inequity is the biggest thing I've learned about. And I know that's a really massive statement, and of course, we can go into detail of what I've learned, but I think the enormity of the challenge, I don't think I understood before I started this. So I'm very grateful to have my eyes opened, and I'm very grateful to be able to contribute even from, my corner of the world, and with my, skills or whatever I can contribute. I'm really excited and proud, and I feel good and positive about being able to support women's health here in Asia in particular, because this is where I'm based. So this is where I focus.
Wow, so powerful. Thanks so much for sharing. How can people find you and support your work?
Thank you so much for asking that. Amplifying. I love it. So first thing is, of course, we have our website, www.femtechassociation.com. And then secondly, LinkedIn. We really try to keep up to date with what's happening in the market. We try to post a lot about the startups, their achievements. We try to post about who's looking for funding, who'd like to fund. We post about trends in the market maps. We really just try to keep that to be our LinkedIn to be a really great knowledge forum for people. And of course, everyone's welcome to reach out anytime to info@femtechassociation.com. We always love hearing from anyone in the ecosystem overseas or here in the region that would love to connect and are looking to contribute to women's health.
Wonderful. So you can find to our audience Lindsay's information in the show notes. Now, time for our signature question. Can you please fill in the blank? I amplify
the needs and solutions for available, accessible, and affordable women's health in Asia.
Wow. Well said. And again, thank you so much, Lindsay, for not only your amazing response, but for just being here and sharing your journey on this episode. It was so cool to not just connect with you, learn more about your journey, but also the amazing things that you're doing with FemTech Association Asia and all the different impacts that's promising in the world. And I just want to sit and just reflect on a few things that I appreciate. So I want to, first of all, thank you for like your insight and the depth with which you've shared excitement. I talked about this earlier, but I think I love how you have woven in the being a student, being someone who is strategic in priorities, someone who is amazing at narrative, but also someone who looks at policy in addition to individual conversations when it comes to ecosystem building. I love that you've have in your own way amplified the voices of many amazing founders in Asia who are building in femtech. And finally, I just want to say thank you for being someone who is bringing your own form of advocacy through your professional experience and those skills, and to your point you made, being an action-oriented person developing in the space. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Likewise. So I look forward to staying in touch, but I would like to say thanks again for this episode, and bye for now. To our listeners, thanks for tuning into this episode of Founders Amplified. I hope you're feeling as inspired as I am. If you'd like to learn more about our guest and support them, check out the show notes for their details. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a rating, share it with someone you know, and follow us for more inspiring episodes like this one. If you're a founder who is driving innovation and impact in any industry or sector anywhere in the world and would like to be a guest, we'd love to hear from you. Check out the show notes for more information. And finally, remember that you, yes, you, have the power to amplify the voices around you. Whether you're a colleague, family member, friend, funder, mentor, or just another fellow human, your support matters. So I invite you to celebrate and uplift the underrepresented innovators in your life who are driving innovation and impact. Let's create a better future for everyone, together. Until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and keep amplifying.